Serious, what's a scary science fact that the public knows nothing about? Grapefruits completely duck with a shitload of prescription medications. Probably the most common one that will affect the general healthy individual is that it can duck with some contraceptive pills. Ain't got no time for no grapefruit baby. Edit. There seems to be a few worried people, so just for clarification, it's probably not going to actually get you pregnant. It may really ramp up those pesky side effects due to its interacts with estrogen production, though, so still worth considering. Whoa, I'm glad I caught this comment. I had no idea about this. I love grapefruit, so I'll have to check if it affects my Zoloft and Concerta prescriptions. Zoloft in the UK is sertraline, which is what I used to take, and grapefruits do duck with it. My sertraline used to come with it written on the box, do not drink grapefruit juice. If your dog swims in a lake after receiving a spot on flea treatment, it absolutely decimates the invertebrate population. A large dog swimming in 8 Olympic swimming pools worth of water soon after treatment will leach enough neurotoxin to kill 50% of the lake's invertebrate population within 48 hours. I say after, I mean relatively soon after, within say a day, to have an effect quite this devastating. The leaching does reduce over the month, but it's still there, and the effect of multiple dogs still allows for a terrible buildup of chemicals. This has blown my mind. What are the active chemicals that cause this? Imidacloprid, permethrin and methoprene. I never knew this was why, but I remember working in a vet clinic at the front desk, and they told us to always tell people not to let their dogs go for a swim in any body of water for at least a week after getting a flea treatment. I always assumed it was BC the medicine would just wash off. This is why it is so important to tell people the why. Really easy to ignore advice or instruction if you don't understand the implications. I only recently learned that when you get sunburned, the burn isn't because of skin cell damage. The UV radiation damages the DNA. Then the skin cells decide to commit suicide and fall off so that the damaged DNA doesn't produce cancer. I'll never be mad at my skin peeling again. That you should never use bleach to clean cat pee. The combination creates chlorine gas that is very toxic. Did you try it, or how did you find it out? Stupidly, yes. It made a horrific smell, so I googled and realized how bad it could have been. Opened all the windows, masked up and cleaned it up. Also, another cat fact, lilies are incredibly toxic to cats. I love cats, so thanks for the tips. Also, don't mix vinegar with bleach. It can make potentially lethal chlorine gas. Edit. When it's mixed in a poorly ventilated area is when it can be fatal. Still, not a good choice to do at all. One or the other. When doing an autopsy, they don't put the organs back where they belong. They are all stored in the belly. All together in a bag, like giblets in poultry. Hey, I literally just left an autopsy. Righto you are. If you're exposed to rabies and start to show symptoms, your chance of survival is virtually 0%. We give our pets rabies vaccines. Are there rabies vaccines for people? Yes, and they are effective at preventing the disease after you've been exposed to it, as long as you aren't displaying symptoms yet. Which is why they recommend to treat any animal bite very seriously and get it checked. If you do this, your odds of ever dying from rabies is essentially zero. Unless a bat gets you in the middle of the night and you wake up with an oddscape assuming you just bumped into something the day before. Brain aneurysms can be completely unpredictable and can happen at any time in your life, no matter how healthy you are. A kid who I went to high school with at the age of 16 just did not wake up one morning and his cause of death was a brain aneurysm. I lost my husband of 12 years, we were best friends for 20 years, to a sudden brain aneurysm. Last words to me were, "Hun, I feel dizzy," and bam, on the floor, dead. I did CPR for 20 minutes waiting for help to come. Doctors said it was instant. It sucked for me because it was so sudden, but I take solace in the fact he felt no pain. He hated hospitals and never spent a night in one in his 62 years of life. Most ironic thing was, and I live in Mexico, is that it was on the Day of the Dead. Hard for me at the time, but man, if I got to have a choice of what day to go, it would be something like that. We had a weird sense of humor, RIP Al. Extra Reddit. to the questions. This happened 8 years ago. It was very hard at first. Lost a lot of weight. I do not recommend the grief diet, but I knew he wanted me to live life to the fullest, just as he had done. This incident taught me to find humor in life, never take things too seriously, and live to the fullest. You never know when it's your time. My great-grandmother died of a brain aneurysm one night, watching her favorite TV show, eating cake. I always say that's exactly how I want to go. Was probably horrific for my great-grandfather sitting next to her though. Edit to add, anyone who lost a loved one suddenly, or had a loved one become suddenly disabled due to a brain aneurysm, I truly am sorry. My great-grandmother died after a full life, suddenly, with no pain. Brain aneurysms vary wildly in how they affect people. After having loved ones die due to Alzheimer's, cancer, and vehicular manslaughter, I stand by wanting to die like my great-grandmother did. This is how 75% of my grandparents went. It's actually pretty comforting to know that that's probably how I'll go. One day, one of my veins or arteries will weaken and break, and then I will be gone. No long hospital stays, no years of suffering. The quickness can be a comfort. Microplastics in the food and water supplies are crossing the blood/brain barrier. SHHH. More entertaining/enjoyable is that it isn't even mostly from garbage. It's from our synthetic fiber clothes degrading in the wash. There are alternative ways some proteins can form tertiary structures. These different structures make the protein unable to function. These alternate protein structures are infectious and incurable as they are so stable. If you get them in your blood, they will slowly convert your own proteins when making contact. They are called prions. It gets worse. All of the diseases they cause are horrific progressive nightmares that aren't just incurable, but untreatable. And they're all 100% fatal. There's one that just stops you being able to sleep. It has two forms. Fatal familial insomnia, where the prion is inherited, and sporadic fatal insomnia, where the prion is not inherited. You start off having difficulty sleeping, which causes mental health issues such as panic attacks and paranoia. Then you start getting hallucinations. Then you completely lose the ability to sleep. Then finally dementia, insanity, and death. It's universally fatal, and usually kills you within about 18 months, sometimes as fast as 7. There's a woman in America who has it. She and her husband were both starting out in their well-paying careers when she found out she has FFI. I think her mom died from it. But anyway, she and her husband quit their jobs and started school all over to become researchers to find a way to cure FFI before it affects her. Last I checked, a few years ago, she was still alive. Not sure how their research is going. It's really ducking scary and sad though. She got pregnant, I think with IVF to make sure she didn't pass on the gene. The universe's Higgs field might be metastable, a false vacuum, and decay at any moment, destroying everything. That's kind of awesome to me. For me, the fear of death comes from what you leave behind. Not that I'd like to have everything I know and love destroyed, but that's like the ultimate closure. Just like boom, and that was it. No more suffering for anything in existence. The end. I'm good with it too. Nobody would know what hit them. Sounds like a better way to go than most of us can hope for. I came here for vacuum decay. Before the vaccine, the number of people who have had HPV infection and have had at least one sexual partner was 85% in females and 91% of males. By far the most common STI. Worth elaborating, there are a ton of strains, and most of them are relatively harmless. Only a couple produce notable symptoms or issues, so most people never have any clue they have it. During WW2, the Japanese would continuously experiment on the people they captured, like open a pregnant woman's stomach and see the baby, infect her with syphilis, and see the effects etc. While the Nazis also did commit genocide and all that. Japan was never confronted about those war crimes. I live in the Philippines, a country who suffered terribly under Japanese occupation. Aside from the war being taught through primary to high schools, almost every other family has grandparents who can vividly recall the brutality of the Japanese occupation. From hiding your babies in forests to trunks to dug up holes because the babies get stabbed once heard crying. to rapes and comfort women. Every other family would have a Japanese blood in them, and we know this is a reason, to bombings and mass shootings. Some elders would tell these tales on how they hid from this, to psychological traumas we still see until today. Even with some of my older relatives, the PTSD still exhibits. The trauma runs deep. It's never forgotten here in the Philippines. One of my ancestors was an American soldier serving in the Philippines when it was captured. He escaped the Bataan Death March and fought a guerrilla war against the Japanese. One way the Filipinos endured was to plant corn instead of rice, because the Japanese would take all the rice crop and they hated corn. Heart muscle cells don't reproduce much in adults, roughly 1% per year. If you have an infarction or other stressor that kills those cells, then your heart won't be able to grow new cells to replace the dead ones. This is why patients with diseases like heart failure end up needing a heart transplant. Trying to get this process to happen is a major goal for many cardiac researchers. Edit. Thank you all for making this such an engaging and interesting discussion. I've been studying heart cells for 10 plus years now, basic scientist, no clinical training, and it's so refreshing to read many diverse perspectives and on-point questions. Also, why cocaine should be used very infrequently, if at all, as it's directly cardiotoxic. Edit. Dudes, I'm not a doctor, I can't give you medical advice. Edit. Just Google drug plus cardiotoxicity people. Research the duck out of shit before you try it, and test shit with reagents, for God's sake, it's so easy and cheap. I was a heavy cocaine user for a while, and I still have weird dull pain in my heart at times that lightly goes all the way down my left arm briefly. I used to get these pains all the time, and my left arm and fingers would get cold when I was using a lot of cocaine. I'm talking several grams by myself with lots of cigarettes and speed. Been clean for a while now. Life is much better. Edit. Just want to say this, I was a man who could not stop using cocaine, no matter how hard I tried. I didn't get clean overnight, and it was a difficult path to sobriety with several relapses along the way. But it was worth it. Every day I wake up, and I take a minute to remember how grateful I'm to be sober. Any addict who is seeing this, there is hope and there is a life worth living free of drugs and alcohol. Feel free to contact me if you are struggling. Edit 2. I'm going to see a cardiologist now that y'all have webbed me. Lemnic eruptions. There are pockets of CO2 trapped under lakes all around the world that can be released at any time, creating an invisible tidal wave that kills everything in its path. Since it's heavier than air, you will just suddenly start choking and die. It's only been recorded twice, in two lakes very close to each other. It's exceptionally rare and requires incredibly specific circumstances, such as proximity to volcanic activity, and a lake where the deeper waters and shallow waters never mix. 99.9% of lakes mix at least once a year. It also must have a cool lake bed despite being in an area with high volcanic activity. Nobody is worried about it until an entire town suffocates. The Lake Nyas disaster killed over 1,700 people. They've later found larger pockets near bigger cities though, so it can happen anytime. Anthrax spores can remain viable for decades in the soil or animal products such as dried or processed hides and wool. I heard of issues coming up with those Tough Mudder type obstacle courses. Company rents out a field, digs up the mud. Mud is contaminated with agricultural runoff aquifers, and people get all kinds of infections and viruses. Update. By popular demand, the WHO research paper on requirements for safe drinking water and formaldehyde in drinking water. A lot of people in rural towns with an elevated cemetery around this happens in Ireland a lot. There is formaldehyde leaking into the drinking water. But it won't kill you. But the thought of drinking dead people juice is probably equally bad. Sorry, not sorry. Update. I have a PDF link to the scientific research paper from WHO concerning the requirements for safe drinking water, and it covers the entire formaldehyde in drinking water issue. If anyone is interested. I read it, and I can confirm it's true, but not detrimental to your health even long term. Totally not me thinking the water was tasting weird recently. I happen to live in Ireland. The plague is still out there. The bubonic plague is endemic in many parts of the world, but cases are very rare because we've got it pretty well handled. If there's a general breakdown in society like a nuclear war, supervolcano eruption or asteroid impact, it's out there waiting to come back. Only 2 diseases in all of human history have ever been eradicated in the wild. Smallpox and rinderpest. And smallpox is still present in several labs around the world and has even claimed a victim in that state. Rinderpest only affects cattle and there are still samples around. Disease-wise, everything else that ever existed is still around in some form, somewhere in the wild, and even those 2 are still present in labs. Another Carrington event. The original Carrington event was in 1859, which was basically an intense geomagnetic storm that disrupted/knocked out telegrams, because that's all the technology there was to disrupt back then. Nowadays we use electricity for virtually everything. If it hit now the effect would be like an amp, but globally, there'd be no functional technology that involved electrics. In essence, losing all electrics would in turn stop communications, then logistics and then fundamental infrastructure like food distribution, healthcare and utilities other than electricity. A lot of technology is shielded, but yeah, that would be fun. You're right, a lot of people don't know/forget that incredibly important electrical equipment is shielded in copper or other alloys that can stop electrons from ducking over all electronics. Don't get me wrong, it would be insanely bad, but phone calls, disaster control, and bare basic necessities would be met for most, if not all people living in more developed nations. The amount of people affected by a storm like that would go down significantly for populations not reliant or having minimal access to technology. Scientists don't know exactly how acetaminophen works to relieve pain and reduce fever. They have an idea but nothing for sure, but yet it's the most commonly used pain reliever in the world. This is actually true of a large number of medications. Microplastics revealed in the placentas of unborn babies. DuPont knowingly infected over 90% of the American population with PFOAs, a harmful plastic that has a half-life of 20 years. Lawsuit is still ongoing but no one seems to be bothered. Edit. This link will talk about the different trials and settlements that DuPont and companies alike have faced. Also talks about what a PFOA and its dangerous effects. I heard that it's actually worldwide. John Oliver did a segment, and he spoke of a study where a team went to pretty much every continent and everyone has a bit of PFOAs in their blood BC of it. This is actually a major scandal in Belgium right now. An American company called 3 Meters apparently knowingly dumped large amounts of PFOS similar to PFOAs in Belgian waterways which ended up in the drinking water. Our government knew of that, but kept silent about it for the right price, until someone exposed everything to the public. Of course everyone is now playing that the values were just below dangerous, so it's not a big deal game, to distract from the straight up crimes they committed. How easy it is to inadvertently seriously damage yourself with an unfortunate combination of ordinary supermarket products. Also, prions. Duck prions. I'm glad to see prions so high up here. That's one nasty bugger, and still incurable. Antimicrobial resistance. The bacteria are getting resistant to the drugs much faster than the rate at which we are producing new drugs. Soon we will reach a scenario when antibiotics cannot treat simple yet lethal infections. Nutrition deficiencies such as iron and vitamin C have many symptoms that were uncovered in an experiment in residential school. They would have a class of indigenous children that would never get iron from foods or any intake. Another class would get the iron supplements, then compare for results. What were the results of the study? Some children would grow up with disease. Out of the testing classes didn't survive. Those who did ended up with anemia. Results of the studies are well known to us. Fatigue, pale skin, chest pain, tongue soreness, etc. Inside the permafrost around the world there is stored about twice the amount of CO2 we currently have in our atmosphere. That's why permafrost must stop melting. Don't forget about methane, which is also dangerous, and there's a ton of it frozen up. The German Nazi army consumed massive amounts of Pervitin, a brand name for lethal meth, and the company producing Pervitin made the pills till the 1980s, and the armies used Pervitin for drills till then. The Nazis also put Pervitin in chocolates, calling it Hausfrauen chocolate, to ease the dreaded life of a stay-at-home mother and so on. Eastern Germany still has a huge meth problem, which is a whole lot less surprising, knowing that it has been produced there legally up until fairly recently. There was a famous case where a Finnish soldier ate an entire bottle of Pervitin 30 pills while trying to escape Soviets, which caused him to pass out. After waking up, he skied over 400 kilometers in -30 to -20 sea cold, was injured by a landmine, and laid in a ditch for a week waiting for help. During the week he survived by eating a raw bird and some pine butts. When he was eventually rescued, his heart rate was measured at 200 BPM, and he weighed only 43 kilograms. A pretty typical bender for a meth head. Meth is currently legally prescribed in the US under the brand name Dasaxin for extreme cases of AD. An asteroid passed the Earth in September that was about 90 meters in diameter, and we didn't see it until a day later because it traveled towards us from the direction of the sun. It passed us at half the distance from the Earth to the moon. Just to add a bit of context, you can fit 2 Jupiters between Earth and the moon. And for a bit more context, half the distance of the moon is about 30 times Earth diameter, so if we compare it to shooting, it's like you were aiming for a watermelon and hit something 3 meters next to it. Space is very large. Student shoots at watermelon with arrow, hits the parked car on the other side of the highway. Archery instructor unimpressed. NASA observers lose their ducking minds. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my channel for more curated daily Reddit stories.